Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Ford Tri-Motor. Now, for those of you who've been paying attention real carefully in the marketplace, you probably saw that they were literally giving this plane away. So when you go to see this video, I'm not 100% sure if it'll still be in that status, but either way, you're probably curious on how to fly it, so we're going to go ahead and get started right away. Now, the most incredible thing about this plane, and again, it's just so crazy, is to think the Ford Motor Company built this thing. And it's not to say it's a bad plane, it's not to say it's a good plane. It's just to say, wow, didn't expect that kind of a thing like that. So this aircraft is definitely a blast from the past, but it has some modern amenities. And one of the things that really impresses me with it is how fast it is. Like we've flown a lot of planes of this era, but this thing is legitimately quick. Like you could do Cessna 172 speeds with this thing, given that you have 900 horsepower. But we'll get to that in a minute. So the first challenge we have with this one, kind of looking around, other than the corrugated interior making this thing loud, is getting this darn thing started. And it's a little bit trickier than I expected when I first sat down to get this thing started. It's not a turn on the fuel and crank it kind of a thing. There is an inertial starter in here, and it's a little involved. One thing that we do want to observe, though, is the engine instruments for the engine on this side are actually on this nacelle here. So it's just one of those things you want to kind of be mindful of. That the only thing you're looking at in here is going to be the engine on the front. The stuff for the other side, of course, you have to stick your head out this window and look to observe it. For those of you familiar with a three-engine airplane of this era, that is not uncommon. So let's go ahead and get this thing started. The first place we're going to start is we're actually going to turn our heads around and we're going to have a bunch of different handy-dandy little stuff here. Notice, by the way, our pitch trim is behind our heads. Sigh. That's okay. You're not going to need a lot for this plane. Trust me. What we're going to do is we're going to come over here and you have this fuel selector here. Now, the needle is going to be the thin end, and that's going to be the part that tells us where we are. So we can either turn on the equalizer line here, which doesn't do us much good, or we can just flat out shut this thing off if we need to, or we're going to leave it on the left engine on position. Swing into the middle, there's a handy-dandy little hatch, an important handle for emergency reserve fuel. We don't need this right now. We can leave this alone. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to leave the right engine pointing in the correct direction. Again, notice the directionality here. These are not mirrored to each other. They're the same instrument on both sides. That's a good way to get confused. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to go between our legs here. And how many times did you kick this thing? And this little funky little knob right here, which I think this head's supposed to rotate, but see what it does? Whoopsie daisies, they'll have to fix that later on. But again, you can see very clearly that it is in the correct position for flowing fuel to the front. Next step, we're going to come down here. We have the mixture control. We're going to go ahead and crank the mixtures up here. Again, just to give us a little bit of mixture. You won't really have to touch the mixture in this thing until you cross the kind of, let's call it about 5,000 feet, I think is what the manual says. We want to make sure master ignition is in the on position. There's kind of a hacky way to start this thing. I'm not going to do that, though, because I'm a good person. But we can't play with that. And then last, we're going to come down this little thing that says priming control. Now, the prime on this one, if you read the manual, it says you need 4 blasts per engine. I'm sure in the real world you're cranking this thing while you're starting it, given how old these engines are. But again, we're just going to kind of roll with it here. So I'm going to start with the left engine, which is a little weird. I'm not going to lie. I'm a right engine starter guy, not a left engine starter guy. But hey, I'm going to do what they said. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the primer. I'm going to take my mouse on the left side, left click once. And then I'm just going to click in 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm just going to give it 4 blasts of that nice yummy primer there. I'm going to go ahead and shut this handle off. It's, again, nice little safety kind of piece here. So coming down here, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and engage the battery. We're just going to confirm we have enough voltage, which we do. This is going to die a painful, slow death when we crank the engine, as you'll say. I'm going to crack the throttles just a tiny bit, and then I'm going to look out the window here just to make sure everything's ready to go. Starting it is a little weird. What you do is you have this little button on the floor, and we're going to press it. And it's going to push itself in. Now, these are good old-fashioned inertial starters. So basically what you're doing is spinning up a flywheel. And there's this hatch right here that allows us to engage the actual engine solenoid, which is going to get the party started. What we're doing is we're waiting for that switch to pop out. We engage the solenoid, and then we're just going to come over here and crank the magneto on. Now, if you did that all correctly and you didn't skip anything, what you're going to observe is that the engine... That's what it should sound like. Very peaceful in here. I think that's I got one of them again. I'm just going to look on the side to make sure engine indications are okay. We're a little low on the RPM there. We can actually crack the throttle just a tiny bit more. Temperature's coming up. Oil pressure's fine. So that engine started beautifully. So what we're going to do now is we're going to repeat that for the other engines. So I'm going to go ahead and select the center. We're going to go ahead and unlock the primer. And again, we're just going to go through the motions each time for each individual engines here. So we'll go ahead and put my mouse here. I'll go ahead and 1, 2, 3, 4. Delightful. I'm going to go ahead and lock that. Again, we want to make sure that this thing is off before we start it. And we're just going to repeat the process. So I'm going to go ahead and press the center starter on the floor. I love how it's a floor pedal, like in old cars where you had to push the starter on the floor. And all we're doing is waiting for that switch to pop up. Once we're ready, we're just going to go ahead and engage the solenoid, and then we're just going to click on the magnetos, and we're on our way. Alrighty then. And again, don't be surprised if it doesn't like you the first 5 times that you try to crank it. It can be very, very picky. And there it goes. The solenoid will shut itself off automatically. Perfect. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the final switch here. Go ahead and do it one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. So we're going to go ahead and lock that out. We're going to set this to the bottom position here. And again, primer would be a function of temperature, and if you're lucky that day. Go ahead and push it in the starter, and we're just going to wait for it to pop out. It says about 10 seconds. I haven't really had much trouble with it one way or the other. I just think it's perfectly fine just waiting for it to pop out and then cranking on it. Make sure you're in a position, of course, with your mouse that you can actually hit the thing when it pops out, though. So let's go ahead and crank it. The engine on the right will start cranking. We'll go ahead and pop the little magnetos on. This thing's going to make an enormous amount of smoke. It's going to make, usually the whole plane will go blah, 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 like that. Again, I'm making my own sound effects here because unfortunately I miss those sounds. So that thing's started. We're good to go. We're going to go ahead and check, make sure the solenoids are off. We're going to make sure the generator's turned on. It is not a very powerful generator, and it is a generator, not an alternator. Go ahead and pop on some navigation lights. We could have popped those on a little bit earlier as a warning. And we're just going to confirm that everything looks okay. That looks good. That looks good. Fuel flow. We're going to check all of our instruments to make sure we're good. Oil's a little low. Again, a P's, T's, and E's, kind of a thing like that. Looking out this window, we can see we got about 600. We're just going to give it just a tiny bit more throttle to kind of get in the warm up. There are no cow flaps. The cow flap is just not having a flap at all. I just find that kind of fun. Oil pressure is coming up, which looks pretty good. We'll go take a look at the left side here. RPM's good. We're looking pretty good. Ready to rock. So that's it as far as getting this thing started. Now, some of you are probably sitting here saying, hey, is there some sort of way where we can, like customize, like have like a GPS or something? No, we don't have anything like that. But if you actually float over here, you'll notice there's this little display down here that actually lets you have VOR navigation, which I think is awesome. You can actually see that we have a pretty strong level, and I've selected Hartford VOR here. We're going to use that to navigate ourselves out of here. We have a good old-fashioned ADF on the bottom, and we actually have a working radio here. So, for example, if I want to pop on 121.7, 121, swing this over to 70, and of course there's a big switch, and that's going to go ahead and pop it over. So now we have the ability to contact New Haven ground and kind of let them know that we're about to invade their runway. Now that would be the proper thing to do, but now that we've got this thing roly, we'd probably be waving our hands at everybody, kind of going. Now, the next weird thing about this plane, if you come down here, by the way, I'm going to go on hide the yoke for a second. You'll notice if I squeeze my brake pedal, nothing happens. That's because the brake is a handle. So the way this works is pretty cool. So when I release the parking brake, you're actually releasing all the brakes. And when I take this handle, I can actually pull this to the left, and it puts the left brake on. I can pull it to the right, and it puts on the right braking handle. Look at how weird that is. And if I release it to the center, it's just going to disengage the brake. You don't have differential braking on here. Instead, you have a stick. This thing's like an honest-to-God gear shift lever. It's so different. But again, I love things like that. Now, before we get going, I just want to come over here real quickly and press this button. You'll notice when I click this, it's going to change what panel I'm using here. We have a lot of variety here. Now, we have kind of the 1920s, 30s classic here. We have this ultra-modern one with a GPS and like nice and clear instrumentation. And of course, we have this kind of middle-of-the-road one, which actually mounts an automatic pilot to it. For those of you who look at this autopilot really quickly, you'll probably immediately go, hey, isn't that very similar to the one on our lovely friend, the DC-3? And I would say you are correct. That is definitely the same. The Sperry autopilot automatic. Don't ask me. The Sperry company made a very lovely autopilot here, and it actually has the sensitivity pieces. And this thing was designed to hold the wheel. It wasn't really designed to hold you at a specific altitude or anything along those lines. So while this is super duper cool to have, again, pick the panel that makes the most sense for you. For me, I'm sticking with this one because it's boring and I love it. And we can see this little red needle here to kind of give us a heads up where our VOR station is. All right, let's taxi. So the taxiing on this thing is kind of fun. Remember, you have no differential brakes. What you'd be doing is you'd actually be reaching here and you'd be grabbing onto the little lever and going, and cranking to the right. Fortunately, they gave us a steering tail wheel. They did not need to do that for us, but they gave us one anyway, which makes this thing pretty tolerable on the ground. A word of warning, of course, this is a tail-dragging aircraft. So if you stomp on the brakes, you'll strike the front engine. So just be kind of careful because you don't have those nice, gentle, easy-to-control brakes that you do on some other tail draggers, which makes this thing, like I said, it's such a trip. Such a trip. All right, we're just going to come swing ourselves around here. There's a good old runway 20. I've been down, haven't flown down here in a while, actually. And one of the fun things is, I think some of the worst turbulence I've ever experienced in the history of me operating an airplane came when I was flying here, kind of a thing like that. It's just, oof, I just remember that very, very clearly that day getting really, really, really smacked around. And again, trying to keep my speed down. This is a very high lift aircraft. And another thing that I'm really surprised by is just how much performance it has. I mean, obviously, we're only running at half a tank of gas. You can see that pretty clearly there. My little needles doing their happy dance right there. But realistically, this thing just goes, just goes. You'll see what I mean when I hit it. It is certainly not, and again, here's our dangerous over braking here. You got to be very careful. Do not stomp on the brakes. Unfortunately, we can only stomp on the brakes. Isn't that fun? So we're going to come around here. It looks like a canary cage for a little compass there. Oh, let's go swing ourselves. Ooh, lifted that tail wheel up. Success. All right, so we're just going to confirm that everything is working okay here. One of the fun things you can do with this engine is you can do your magneto check all at the same time. So I like to call that needle wishful thinking. Notice it stabilizes when we get out of the nasty RPMs here. That looks pretty good right there. And of course, what we do is we go through the motions. I'm going to get a little bit each time. Normally, we'd have to look out the window, and what I would do is I'd ask my autopilot to check these for me. If I hear my engine cut out, that's a good sign something went wrong. And of course, we can go look out the other window, and we can check that one as well. I have a feeling it's working perfectly fine. Always pull the throttle back to 0, see if the engine cuts out. It should not cut out on you. A lot of planes will get a lot of blah, blah, blah. And again, that's a technical term there for when the whole plane starts vibrating viciously and makes you go, ah. That's just exactly how these kind of things are. All right, those are all off. We're going to flip on our landing lights. Notice we have like no amperage left after hitting all those buttons there. We'll go ahead and check our volts. Hey, that's killing us a little bit here. Maybe I'll just use one of them. It's daytime. We're perfectly fine. All right, takeoff on this thing is very conventional. We're going to smoothly apply about 3/4 of our throttle here. Our goal here is to just let the engines synchronize with each other. Remember, we have 3 separate engines here, and they're all going to come up at their different rates. Looks about even for that one. And again, in the real world, this would be a much bigger, important step. Unfortunately, or unfortunately, in the sim, it is not. So I'm going to go ahead and smoothly apply takeoff power, which is just stomping on it. Now, the first thing that's going to happen is the tail is going to start flying. It takes nothing. Watch this. Whoop, there it goes. And all you're going to do is just hold level. Don't let it sink. Don't let it climb. And like that, you are in the air like a machine. Like, it's incredible. Like, a 172 doesn't take off that smoothly. Once we're airborne, of course, we just want to keep an eye on our PSTZs, kind of a thing like that, make sure everything's good. But look at the climb rate on this thing. It is amazing. Like, I think it might even be overpowered, but it is 900 horsepower, so it kind of does not surprise me. You can see we're slowly starting to come up in altitude here. What we're going to do now is we're going to start making our navigation way over to our target. Now, notice when I bank the plane, you see my little turn coordinator down there in the middle? I'll put a pretty good amount of bank on this thing. See how it starts to hike towards the left? Now, normally, you go ahead and stomp on the left pedal for this one. But for this one, believe it or not, once you get it going, you don't need as much left pedal as you think you do. One of the things that really surprised me is I expected to have to stand on it to coordinate the turns in this, but it just is not that bad. When you're coming out of the turn, don't forget right aileron, right pedal, but don't overdo it. Otherwise, you're going to go woo, woo, woo all over the place. And again, this is woo, woo, woo is the technical term for this action. And everybody who's done it knows exactly what I'm referring to. All right. The POH on this thing is very limited. They don't give us a lot of information as far as like climb power or anything. But what they do tell us is they tell us our climb speed should be about 110 miles in an hour. Now, if I come down here, you'll see I'm doing about 85. Now, if I want to actually get to 110 and still be able to climb here, you're going to have to stick the nose of the plane down really far. Let me show you exactly what that angle in the cabin's going to look like here, so you can see just how silly this is. There we go. I'm going to pull the nose up a little bit. That's about 105 right there. And that's about what it is. And believe it or not, even at this nose angle, it feels like I've flapped the foot. I forgot if I put it up or something like that. But you can see I'm doing 110. This is the ideal climb speed. And you can see we are getting, what do you want to call it? About 1,200 feet per minute, which is, wow. I wish I could get that on a 172. That'd be sweet. So not knowing exactly what they say, again, I don't have the actual POH with me. I just have what they gave us. I'm going to go ahead and reduce power a little bit here. I'm going to come down to 1,800 RPM. I don't know these engines well. It just seems to be a generally good suggestion not to be cranking on it, especially if we're doing a max performance here. Now that we're on our way, we're just going to kind of center up our needles. Again, since we're using the old school cockpit there, that little red needle represents the position of the navigational source that we're climbing towards. And this feels about right, actually. Not too much, not too little. And now it's just a matter of monitoring the engines and making sure you don't see any nasty blue or black flames flying out the side or anything like that. Looking out there, I mean, look at the wheels on this thing. They're just like a little spirals. Oh man, that is so old school. I love that. And of course, you got these lovely right engines that are just sort of chilling here. It's my right engine, but it's on the left side. Shh, don't make that joke. And we're just going to proceed at about, like I said, about 110, about 1800 RPM is probably going to be a pretty safe bet. You'll be surprised just how far you have to push the throttle forward in order to get 1800 in order to get it going. So now that we're going, we're going to have a quick little airplane change here so we can take a look at some of the other feature sets that you're going to get. A little bit of down nose here. You don't need to zip, 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 zip or anything like that. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to change my panel options. I love this nice modern panel. That's lovely. To this one, which has got our handy-dandy little Sperry in the middle here. This is a cool autopilot. What this tries to do is this tries to basically maintain whatever you dial in here. So for example, if I grab my heading adjust and I select on my heading, I'm going to sit here again, you pick it. We're heading, what do we need to head? About 30, 40 degrees here. So I love how they have the big tooltip there right in the middle of where you need to be looking in order to safely operate the plane. But that's all right. I'm a pilot. I don't actually need to know that information. And that looks pretty good right there. That's about what we want it to be. And you can see it's slightly off. You can see we pick up. We also have a little gyro drift adjuster, which is like, wow, that's old school kind of like that. And we have a little attitude change if we need to kind of do that. We have our pitch adjust. We have all of our different functionality kind of built in. Then we have the big old click gyro power button. So now that I push that, the gyro pilot is kicking in. And now one of the things you want to remember with the gyro pilot is you want to have the aircraft pretty much perfect before you engage it. This is not a modern autopilot. This is a hold the wheel for me sort of autopilot. So you can see it's doing a decent job of maintaining it, but we're climbing like a weed here. So one of the things that they have, which makes our life a little bit easier, is we can actually adjust the pitch by wheeling this little knob here. So when I wheel it that way, the nose comes up. When I wheel it to the left like this, it's going to make my nose come down. So now the game that you're playing here is you're trying to get it so that when you're at cruise, it's basically normal. So let's go ahead and a couple more clicks down. And again, this is not an altitude hold. This is a pitch hold. And to make things a little fun for us. RPM is going to start creeping up there. I'm going to reduce my power to 75%. And again, we're just going to fit with it. Whoa, just a little bit more there. Nice. I love the bank adjust, too, if we needed to make an adjustment on that. The heading hold, we're lucky we actually have a heading selector on this. A lot of them, it was just basically hold the rudder the one specific angle. Not the most sophisticated thing. And I love how you have the sensitivity increase at the bottom. So there we have it. We're basically right on course. We can see over here, based on our elevator adjustment here, it is not the world's most precise holding altitude. Of course, what altitude are we? I wasn't even looking. About 4,100 feet, I want to call that. So we're doing pretty good so far, and we're definitely on our way. Getting bounced around like we always do this time of year in Connecticut. For us, it's summertime, so if it's not a wall of clouds, it's a wall of turbulence. It's just kind of the way the weather is here. Now, one thing I wanted to point out on this aircraft is behind your head, you have this little switch that says reserve. Now, when people think about that tank, let me just pull out the tank situation here so you can understand what it is we're looking at here. You'll notice we have this center tank. And that right now is holding 25 gallons. You'll notice what we do here is, unfortunately, we don't have the center gravity display. Otherwise, I could demonstrate this. When we play with this, the fuel tank is actually a little bit back. So when we actually burn fuel out of this, what we're essentially going to start doing is we're going to be shifting the center of gravity forwards. So one of the things we have to think about is not touching that handle until we get to a point in our journey where we actually need to engage it, so that we'll be able to actually benefit from it without, throwing off our center of gravity and our trim and everything like that. A lot of times what you could probably do, and again, without the actual POH in front of me, this is all conjecture, I would not be surprised if you were in a situation that as you're navigating, you could actually basically fly with just the center tank, or you could fly with just the left and right tanks, full kind of a thing, and pull it out of there directly. One thing you want to watch out for in an aircraft like this, other than the fact it's starting to drift, welcome to using an old school autopilot, by the way, is we want to keep a close eye on fuel consumption. And one of the things you probably see is we haven't been going very long here, but we have nailed our fuel. We don't really have a lot of fuel on board. As a matter of fact, if I open this up again real fast, you'll see that I'm carrying not much. It's like 110 gallons per tank, plus we have 50 in the emergency reserve tank. That's not a lot of fuel, so you're going to go through it very, very quickly. I know there's a very, very strong tendency to reach for the mixture handles, but like I said, the POH says we're really not supposed to mess with those until we start getting ourselves a little bit closer. Speaking of a little bit closer, let's go ahead and teleport to where we need to land this thing. All right, we're making our way down. So one of the interesting things we've done is, of course, along the way, pushed every button, flipped on the reserve tank, experimented, and all those things, is we're dealing with a pretty old school aircraft here. This is definitely one where we have no fancy cow flaps to keep the engines at one particular temperature. Ugh, that is so sketchy. The strut goes in at the bottom of the engine. Ugh. This is definitely, you got to land this one as soft as possible kind of thing. So one of the challenges with this aircraft is keeping the engines happy on the way down kind of a thing. One of the advantages we have to that effect is the fact that because this aircraft is basically so high drag, we can really let the nose drop on us, and it's not going to give us any issues as far as stability goes. I can stick that nose down, and again, our top speed on this thing, generally around 110, 115, I really shouldn't exceed. One thing I did find, which I think you'll all find interesting, is it actually gives us a redline speed. And you can see it's right around 115, which is like, that seems a little much, but again, it's just kind of one of those sort of things like that. So our airport destination is right over the nose. We're going to try to keep the engine running a little bit happily here. We're doing about, what do we got? About 1,500 RPM. That's a pretty good descent power. It's not going to give us too much. It's not going to give us too little. And we're going to make our way down for a straight-in approach. Now, one of the things that really surprised me with this aircraft when I was first experimenting with it was just the fact that the aircraft does not lose speed like you'd expect something that's this high drag. You really, really expect it to basically kind of fight you to the bitter end, sort of a thing like that. But it isn't like that. And I don't know if that's a flight sim thing or something like that. But these aircraft just do not give up speed very quickly, especially when you get into that ground effect. And ground effect is definitely something we have plenty of in this plane. We can actually take a look just how honking that wing is. This thing is not going to want to slow down. So I'm going to go and bring my head. You can already start to make out the runway over there on the right. Good old lovely runway 2. I think that's like, I've taken off and landed from that one probably 200 times in the real world. It's getting to be extreme. Like, I think of just how much damage I've done to that poor piece of concrete there. It's fun to think about sometimes. Now, the real joke, of course, is there's a runway 20, which is the one that's facing the opposite direction. That one you land on like 5% of the time, maybe. Almost always you're taking off runway 2 there. And like, it feels wrong when you have to use 20, but again, it depends on what time of year too. If you're in the fall, 20 is going to be a lot more common than it is, especially in the summer. All right, so now we're going to get this thing set up for landing. Now, the POH doesn't give you a lot of details on landing here. The only thing it says is your touchdown speed is 45. The other thing, of course, it tells you is the fact that your approach speed is usually between like 55, 65, which is actually very similar to a 152, not a 172. So if we actually pop this open, we have another clue here, and that's the fact that our stall speed is 60 knots. The reason that is helpful to us is we can take the number 60, and we can actually multiply that by 1.3. And what that will do is that will provide us with the critical calculation we need. Let's see here, 60 times 1.3 gives us 78. That is much too fast for this aircraft. So one of the things we're going to have to do here is don't be surprised if you have to do some energy bleeding maneuvers here. So looking off my nose here, I can see that I've got the runway. I'm coming in pretty darn fast. Obviously, if I were a Mooney, this is like instrument approach speeds here. But for us in the forward, we're going a little fast. We're doing about 100. Now, I know you're like, oh, we can make that work. You can just slip the plane. I'd rather not. And again, we're trying to preserve the engine as much as possible here. We could probably do a chop and drop and come down, but in this particular case, I'm actually going to just put myself into a nice little spiral here and suck out some of the energy of the aircraft that way. Now, this is, again, seems to be something that's like, well, if you had flaps, you wouldn't have to worry about this. Well, you're not completely wrong there. Because again, that's one of the reasons why we have so many of these modern conveniences in airplanes. Now, you'll notice as you're at lower speed, like right now, I think we're doing about 90 miles an hour here, you're going to notice that you need a lot more rudder action to keep this thing happy. So kind of keep that in the back of your head if you're trying to keep the passengers in the back seat somewhat relaxed during our journey here. Now, we got about 500 feet above the ground here. That's a pretty good altitude. And if I look off the nose now, you'll see that it looks a little bit better here. Now, again, when you start slowing this down, your controls are going to feel like they're in ice. So kind of be ready for that. It is they get very, very, very lame very quick. I'm sure there's a combination of different reasons. So let's go ahead and get this thing slowed down. Give yourself plenty of up trim there. You don't want to be fighting it at the last possible second here. So we're looking, like I said, for about 65. 60 is kind of the speed that I like at this weight. Obviously, we want to touch down at about 45, which is very, very slow. Again, that's like the speed people drive on the street outside of my house, kind of a thing like that. All right, nose up. Again, keep the trim in here. We don't want to let the nose drop, and it's very tempting to just kind of fly it kind of by hand, but you'll find that if you have to make that kind of last-minute little tug, if you don't have that extra little bit of nose up trim, it just gets really, really tricky. All right, I'm starting to feel the nose start to rise on us. That doesn't surprise me. It just means we're getting slow. It's about 65 miles an hour right there. Welcome to obstruction territory. They actually have a restriction at night that you're not supposed to be flying in certain instrument approaches because of the obstructions. But apparently they just lifted that too. So runway's made. So believe it or not, I'm going to cut the throttle. We have plenty of speed there. You can see we're doing about 70, which is plenty. And we're just going to basically guide it over the runway here. Now, this one's a little tricky to fly at the last couple seconds because the ground effect is so real. You want to try to get on the two wheels. If you bounce a little, that's okay. Now, remember, your tail likes to fly, so we want to go ahead and pull back on the yoke. And we can gently apply some breakage here. We don't want too much breakage because you'll find out that you're going to go and do a face plant if you go overdo it on the brakes. So again, we're just all pulling back on the elevator here. We want to try to slow down as much as we can. Once you start getting slow, go ahead and release the brakes, and you can go ahead and let the elevator, again, keep it down. We want to keep it nice and grounded. Now, if we did have a crosswind, you want to go ahead and make sure your controls are pointing into that wind. We are still a tail dragger aircraft, even though we're this gigantic bus. This thing's crazy. So we're going to go ahead and bring this thing over to the taxi area. Again, a relatively straightforward process. Remember, it can be very tricky to see over the nose on this thing. So as you're making these maneuvers, just be mindful that you're wide. Again, if you're coming from me, I would never have a plane this high in the air when I come to park. Of course, my parking space is right over there on the left when I fly in the real world. There used to be over there on the right, but they moved it. And again, we're just going to navigate very coolly, carefully, casually along the ground here. We want to give the engines plenty of time to kind of stabilize. Again, these are not water-cooled engines. They are clearly air-cooled engines. You can see a little Brea radiator on the side there, which makes things just interesting for us. I'm going to go ahead and bring us around here on the right. Oh, that's a big airplane. Oh, yeah. Good old TBM. I don't think I've ever actually seen a TBM here in Hartford, but that's perfectly fine with me. I got the little stunt club doing their little thing. They're having a little gaggle. Go ahead and kick the nose over. And I just realized I put myself in a parking spot I can't get out of. All right, now we're going to go ahead and secure the aircraft. Pretty old school, pretty standard. We're just going to give it a little bit of power here. We're just going to go ahead and pull the mixture out one by one. And again, we're just letting each engine kind of come out on its own. It's going to come out as soon as the mixture kind of fails there. And again, just watch the propeller as it comes down because it's going to take a second. There it goes. That one's going to seize up. Wow, that one wants to go. There it goes. And then, of course, we want to shut off our master ignition. We want to shut off all of our magnetos. We want to go ahead and secure our fuel, which right now we're in this one. Normally, we want to shut those two off behind our head. And then we go ahead and power the last couple bits off and enjoy your day.